Right now, I'm very pleased to have with us in studio our old friend Stephen Halbrook, attorney and scholar. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Kim. It's great to be here in person instead of on the phone for a change.
I know, and you know, so often we're talking about legal cases. We come on and refer to you as Second Amendment attorney and scholar, but today we actually get to talk more from the scholarly perspective, because you have a brand new book out, Gun Control in the Third Reich, Disarming the Jews and, quote, Enemies of the State. And as you told me, this wasn't some slapdash push together thing that let's get this out here before the end of the year. You've been working on this for a long time.
I've actively been involved in researching the book at least 15 years. Most of the information in the book is from archives in Germany that had to be found. It's never been published before, and in the German language. I actually got interested in the topic back in 1968. Those of you who are as old as me will remember that bills were proposed in Congress to register guns. And John Dingell, congressman from Michigan, objected to that, and he said, you know, the Nazi Germany did the same thing. They registered guns, and the proponents of the bills said, nah, that never happened. They never did that.
Really? They said the Nazis had never engaged in firearm registration?
That they never did that, and they never used firearm registration records to look up enemies and to round them up, which was totally outlandish. They had blacklists for everybody and everything, every topic you can imagine.
Now, did you know that at the time? Did you know it was as outlandish a statement at the time?
Oh, yeah. That's a no-brainer, and yet the proponents of the legislation, the administration was tied in with this. That was the LBJ years. Library of Congress did a study, and they said they couldn't find any evidence that the Nazis had ever used gun registration records for any bad purpose. They didn't look very hard.
Unbelievable. All right, so what have you found, Stephen, in your research?
Well, what I found is we go to the close of the Great War, World War I, and you had a lot of political violence in Germany, particularly between the communists and the Nazis. Street fights, murders. And the bright idea came upon some officials that if we can only require people to get permits for guns and require guns to be registered, that will solve the political violence. And the opponents of that, the same debates as today, said, what do you mean? Only law-abiding people would register their guns. People who would commit illegal acts or acts of political violence, they're not going to do that. And that's the way it turned out. Hello, just as you would expect. They decreed a registration. They passed a law in 1928, and they simply decreed gun registration in 1931. But they warned officials, do not let these records fall into the wrong hands. And guess what? About 14 months later, who took power? The wrong hands, Adolf Hitler. And they immediately used those records to confiscate guns from their political enemies. That would be the Social Democrats in particular, and any group that was non-Nazi. They started picking on the Jews some then, but they did a lot more against them 5 years later.
All right, so at the most very basic level, Stephen, I think maybe the most basic lesson that can be learned in all of this is that, look, even the best of intentions can have unintended consequences that can lead to unimaginable results, and perhaps even unspeakable, unthinkable results.
It can. It won't necessarily lead to those results.
Right.
But it can. We know in England they've had registration and gun bans. The few guns that exist are registered if they're legal. And they're a fairly democratic society still. Mm-hmm. But yeah, what can go wrong will go wrong sometimes. So there are historical lessons to learn here. And also, what was going on in Germany in those years was reported in the American media. There was before Hitler came to power, there was a Nazi who proposed that Jews couldn't get food and that anyone who wouldn't turn their guns in 24 hours would be executed. That was in 1931. Later that same year was the registration decree. That was all reported in the American media. When the Nazis attacked the Jewish communities in 1938, Kristallnacht, that was reported very widely, that guns were seized. So Americans were aware of this going way back, and that's why we've always had defeat of registration proposals in the Congress. There's always been a feeling among most Americans that we don't accept gun registration in this country, and there have been bad things that have happened from it, and I think a lot of it goes back to those years.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And I would say, now again, not that I'm comparing either political party to a totalitarian regime, but with the partisan rancor that we have in this country, with the stories every day of the NSA spying scandals coming out, and our Americans' emails being read or their phone calls being listened to. The idea of opening the door wide and saying, "Here, come on in this other area here. Let me invite you inside my home. Let me register all of my firearms. Let you throw me in prison if I sell a gun to my brother without going through all of the hoops and hurdles and the paperwork." It's completely understandable that Americans would be not just cautious, but hell no to that type of proposal.
And you're going to assure me, number one, that the government's not going to keep the records if we had so-called universal background checks, even though there would be a law saying they have to be destroyed. You're going to assure me not only of that, but that no private individual could ever break into those records. I mean, that's a big deal. We've got universal government eavesdropping on everybody and everything now, but we also have these people who can break into any of these computer systems and steal the data. We've tried very hard in our National Instant Criminal Background Check system, the NICS system, where you go through a background check if you buy from a gun from a federal firearms licensee, to protect those records. And no matter what we do, there's a danger they could be compromised. We don't want to extend that program into every nook and cranny and to everybody's house in the whole U.S.
Right. Right, absolutely. And that's why I think, again, not that I'm drawing direct historical comparisons to the United States in 2013 and Nazi Germany, but a totalitarian state in the 1930s, and the idea that we're all living with now of the sort of surveillance society. I think that there are broader civil liberties arguments that absolutely resonate and come through with this book.
Yeah, and make no mistake, I'm not comparing Nazi Germany with anybody today. I'm not calling anybody a Nazi, but this is a legitimate historical topic.
Absolutely.
And we do learn from history. So, and I'm not saying that the Second Amendment justifies getting out a gun and shooting government officials or anything like that. Nobody's ever said anything like that.
No, but there's in society today, there's and I'll tell you my theory, Steve. It goes back to that YouTube video. Actually, it goes back to that film that was made in Germany a few years ago, The Fall of Nazi Germany. And there was that very famous scene of Adolf Hitler learning that it's all falling apart, and it's been parodied a jillion times on YouTube now. And
Downfall.
Downfall, exactly.
Yes.
And so you say Nazi, and there's almost either it's Godwin's law. It's somebody either calling somebody a Nazi, you're a Nazi, to try to stop them from having a political discussion with them, or it's this sort of buffoon, cartoonish image now. And so, as a student of history and as somebody who agrees with you 100%, we do learn from history. As Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of there are a lot of things that we can learn from any time period in history. To have this era, the World War II era, and what happened in Nazi Germany, in any subject, be off limits, just seems weird to me. And to have it be sort of seen as cartoonish, and to have people refuse to take it seriously. Jonah Goldberg had a book that came out a few years ago, Liberal Fascism, in which he made a lot of very good points. Now, perhaps the cover of the smiley face with the Hitler mustache people saw as a bit unserious as well, but that was one of the problems that he had, was people just can't get their head around the fact that this type of totalitarianism, and I think they really can't get their head around the fact that this actually happened in a modern industrial society.
Right. I mean, how could you get more developed culturally? Germany, with the music, the philosophy, and all of that. Let me tell a little story. In going through these records, I found arrest reports of Jews for possessing guns when it was not illegal for them to possess guns. And I Googled their names, and most of them I didn't know. I didn't find out any information, but one of them's name was Alfred Flatt Tov, and I saw his birth date and birthplace, and I found that that he was an Olympic champion for Germany in the 1896 Olympics in Athens. He won gold medals in gymnastics. And I have an arrest report in October of 1938 where it says his offense was being a Jew with a gun. Actually, he had 3 firearms. And they knew that the guns were registered because the registration records were still at the police station where he registered them. The crime scene was an address that I knew was not his home address, and it turned out to be the police station address. He was in line with other Jews turning in their guns because they had been commanded to do so. And this was 1 month before the night of the broken glass. So they had planned this attack on the Jews, and it was obviously unannounced when it would take place, but it did take place in November 1938. So these registration records were used to disarm the Jews before the pogrom known as the Night of the Broken Glass or Kristallnacht, and here they were turning in their guns a month beforehand.
It's just, and I'm sure the record is full of stories. This was one individual that you talked about, but he represents Lord knows how many.
It was an incredible story to trace his tale. In 1942, actually, after he turned in his gun, by the way, he was turned over to the Gestapo. He was released after that and lived the life of other Jews in Germany, things getting worse and worse. In 1942, he was deported, and one of his Olympic buddies from the old days tried to intervene on his behalf, and he was abruptly refused, and he was deported and died just a few weeks after he got to the concentration camp. So, I mean, you can see a whole tale there. Life as normal, Olympics and all of this, and yeah, okay, I've got to register my guns, and then what happens? I mean, he must have had some regrets.
Absolutely, to go from being a national hero to part of a pariah class, and and then to be among those who simply disappear.
Yes.
To one day, no trace of them left. Unbelievable. And that is why, Stephen, I think as hard as the history is, I'm the son of a World War II veteran. My dad served in the Pacific Theater in World War II, and these guys are getting old now. I mean, my dad was a young guy when he fought in World War II, and he just turned 87. I think it is incredibly important that this history not get lost. It is hard history to read sometimes. This isn't a warm fuzzy memoir.
No.
This is tough going, but it is. You've got to honor those. I think to read this history and to know this history is to honor those who lost their lives. You have to remember that those lives were important.
Going backwards, people want to reach a policy position that, we should be able to ban guns, and so then they want to go back into history and say none of this would have made any difference had these people had a constitutional right to have guns, had they had guns more widely, had they not had registration. But I can tell you this, that the Nazis themselves thought it really mattered, because the actions they took were extraordinary to deprive their political enemies with guns and then the Jewish population with guns. So it really made a difference to them. And for us to look back and to say today it would have made no difference whatever. And I'm not saying there would have been armed partisan movements or anything like that in Germany, but I am suggesting there may have been many individual cases where it could have made a big difference.
Well, Stephen, again, I appreciate you coming on the program, sir. The new book, published through the Independent Institute, Gun Control in the Third Reich. It is available now. Thank you again, and look forward to
get it on Amazon.com or IndependentInstitute.com or anywhere else.
All right. Listen, Stephen, thank you again, sir, and I look forward to having you back in studio or via telephone again very soon.
Okay, Cam. Always great to be on the show. Thank you.